Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
I was born free. I was born free.
Thank you.
I was born free.
Hello, New Hampshire. How about a big round of applause for the New Hampshire Republican Party? This leadership summit has set the pace. I want to thank you all for sticking around. I know I'm the only thing in between you, ice cream, and a wonderful Saturday afternoon. I can't help but think for all that you have heard over the last 2 days, that everything that can be said has been said. But it hadn't been said by everybody yet, so I'm delighted to be here. Let me begin where I always begin. I'm Mike Pence. I'm from Indiana, and I'm running for President of the United States of America. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your attention. You know, I come before you today at a momentous time in the life of our nation and in the life of the world. You know, I'm running for president because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think President Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. Their open border policies have launched the worst border crisis in American history. And every city and town in this country is paying the price. It's an avalanche of humanity. And an avalanche of fentanyl that's claiming lives every day. Their war on energy has caused gasoline prices to go through the roof. Their runaway spending has created the worst inflation in 40 years. It's beset American families. And that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. Now war rages in Eastern Europe. And now our most cherished ally has faced the worst assault on the Jewish people 1 week ago since the refounding of the Jewish state in 1948. If there was ever a time when New Hampshire was called upon to shape national leadership that would give America a fresh start back to what's always made us strong and prosperous, free, it is now. We need to decide here and now that Joe Biden will never be reelected as President of the United States. And I want to hear what's on your mind, but let me share with you my vision for the way forward. You know, I like to tell people I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. Long before I was your vice president, I was a governor of a conservative state out in the heartland where, just like your governor here, we demonstrated that you can cut taxes, make record investments in education. You can balance budgets. That's what we did back in Indiana when I was governor. And how about a round of applause for Governor Chris Sununu and the job that Chuck Morse and all these state legislators who are here with us today. Thank you so much for your incredible leadership for taxpayers and families. But before that, you know, I was a leader in the Congress for 12 years. And this is one of those days I'm glad I'm still not in Congress. No, I was a House Conservative leader before it was cool. I led the House Conservative Caucus. I battled against the big spenders in our own party, and they almost all remember it. And I must tell you, I never imagined a day, on the worst day that I was battling big spending Republicans, that I would have ever partnered with Democrats to oust a Republican speaker. And the time has come for Republicans on Capitol Hill to come together, elect a speaker, and lead America again in the House. You know, after we left the White House, Karen and I moved back to Indiana. We bought 5 acres and a pond. We got a John Deere riding mower. Got a Ford Ranger pickup truck. I mean, our life's been pretty good. But when I saw the devastation that Joe Biden and the Democrats have wrought on our country, Karen and I reflected on that old Bible verse that to whom much is given, much will be required. And that's why I've stepped forward. Because when I look at this field of worthy men and women who are vying for your support here in the first in the nation primary state, I simply say with great humility, based on my experience in the White House, my experience as a governor of a successful state, my experience as a leader in the Congress, that I'm simply the most qualified and the most consistent conservative in this race. I know we can bring this country back, but it's going to require that the Republican Party lead on the foundation of conservative principles that have defined our movement over the last 40 years, which is a strong national defense, limited government, fiscal responsibility, traditional moral values, and if I'm your president, I promise you we will. Now, there's much debate within this primary about America's role in the world. There's much debate about whether we're going to tackle our national debt. And there's even some that are arguing that we should walk away from our long-standing commitment to the right to life. But I won't shrink from any of those battles. I promise you. And not because it's a pathway to Republican victories, but because it's a pathway to American prosperity and security. It always has been and always will be. You know, I actually became a Republican back in the days of Ronald Reagan. I started out in politics as a Democrat, full disclosure. But when I heard the voice of our 40th president and I heard those ideals expressed, I joined the Reagan Revolution and never looked back. But it's important to remember what the people of New Hampshire saw back in those days, what Republicans have seen every day since, and the agenda that we governed on is still the right prescription for America and always has been. But the truth is, the choice that you face, some people think that we should shrink from our commitment as leader of the free world. Some people think that we should ignore national debt that threatens our children and grandchildren's prosperity. And some people have even taken in this field to criticizing pro-life laws that have been passed in states around the country, but not me. I truly do believe the pathway forward for our party and for our nation is to stand firmly on that time-honored conservative agenda that's defined our movement over the last 4 decades, and to resist the siren song of populism unmoored to conservative principles. We owe the American people nothing less than that time-honored tradition, and I'll deliver it. Let me say one last word about current events. I know I share the horror of everyone in this room and anyone looking on about what took place in our most cherished ally 1 week ago today. The unprovoked attack and invasion by Hamas into Israel that claimed 1,300 lives of men, women, and infant children was an act of unspeakable terrorism. And if the world knows nothing else, the world must know this: America stands with Israel. And we must stand with Israel today. We must stand with Israel tomorrow. And in the difficult days ahead, when Israel does what needs to be done, which is to hunt down and destroy Hamas once and for all, America needs to stand strong. But I want to tell you, whether it's the invasion of a week ago into our most cherished ally, or whether it was the unprovoked Russian invasion into Ukraine a year and a half ago, for me it's inconceivable that any of those things could have ever happened without that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, I believe that withdrawal has emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. And so this is a moment for American strength. That's why I truly do believe that in this moment we should have a president that does a couple of things. Number one, we should all speak with one voice, that we stand with Prime Minister Netanyahu and we stand with the Jewish state of Israel in this moment. Number two, if I was President of the United States, I would have already notified the Joint Special Operations Command to stand up Delta Force, stand up Navy SEALs. Those are Americans being held hostage. I would partner with Israeli Defense Forces, and we would tell Hamas, you have a few hours to turn them out, or we're coming to get them. We're going to hunt them down and bring them home. And finally, we have to recognize who's holding the leash of Hamas and Hezbollah, for that matter. And it's the mullahs in Tehran. And I have no doubt in my mind that the last 2 years of consistent kowtowing by the Biden administration, begging Iran to get back into the Iran nuclear deal and transferring $6 billion in frozen assets back to Iran, emboldened the mullahs. And so we should do a couple of things. Number one, we ought to put snapback sanctions back in place on Iran and bring economic pressure on that regime. Number two, we ought to move the USS Eisenhower to pull alongside the USS Gerald Ford in the Eastern Mediterranean and make it clear to Iran, to Syria, to the Hezbollah in Lebanon to stand down when Israel does what it needs to do. And we should cancel the transfer of that $6 billion to Iran and send it to Israel. Weakness arouses evil, but peace comes through strength. And I say to you, beyond the politics of this moment, beyond the choice that the people of New Hampshire will be faced with, just a few short months from now, I just urge each one of you to use your leadership positions to urge everyone that comes before you and seeks your support to stand without wavering, without equivocation with Israel. America's the leader of the free world. If America's not leading the free world's not being led. It's an old saying in science that nature abhors a vacuum. And I must tell you, when you see the rise of China, when you see China broker an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, when you see an unlimited partnership between China and Russia in Russia's unprovoked invasion, when you see China's continued military provocations in the Asia Pacific, it confirms that truth of history. America needs new leadership. America needs to rededicate ourselves to the principles of peace through strength. And I promise you, you give me the opportunity to be your nominee, we'll not just win an election, but we'll win a future of peace and security and prosperity for all of the American people. So help me God. With that, I'd love to take your questions. Slip your hand in the air. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. But a few things I had to get off my chest. We have a couple of bright young men with microphones. Got a few in the back there. But thank you all for sticking around.
Mr.
Past
Vice President,
kickoff, right?
So you talked about balancing the budget when you were in Congress.
Yes, sir.
What would you cut? What would you reform right now so we get to a balanced budget? Because the debt just keeps rising, and it's going to eventually affect the nation whether we like it or not.
I think I was the first candidate in this race to talk about the national debt and to recognize that 75% of federal spending is in entitlements. Let's begin with a simple fact. If we don't reform Social Security in 8 years, the average household will face a $17,000 a year cut, mandatory cut under the law. So doing nothing is not an option, although that is the policy of Joe Biden. And candidly, it's the policy of my former running mate, who won't even talk about reforming entitlements. But I will. Look, I've been in the Congress. I've been in these battles before, but Republicans have taken these issues on, and they're tough. Because the Democrats and some of their allies in the media invariably will demagogue the issue, right? We all remember grandmother in a wheelchair going over a cliff, right? I think it's different now. I mean, when George W. Bush tried to reform Social Security, we had about a $5 trillion national debt. Now we have a national debt the size of our nation's economy, $33 trillion. But that $33 trillion left unreformed becomes $150 trillion in the next 20 years. If you think inflation is bad today, think about inflation that will be derived from a $33 trillion, $150 trillion national debt. So we got to take it on. It's going to take leadership to take it on. Congress will never do it. Congress does two things well: nothing and overreact. Okay? So this is going to take presidential leadership. Here's what I would do. All right? Because anybody that tells you we're going to balance the budget without talking about entitlements, not being honest with you. Everything they're arguing over in Washington, D.C. right now is they're nickel and diamond with about 10% of the budget. Fact. Some of these experienced state legislators know what I'm talking about. Here's how you do it. You want to know how you do it? Number one, you say, anybody got hair the same color as mine? This doesn't apply to you. Okay? No, it doesn't. If you're 65 or older or you've reached the age of retirement, we're not going to touch Social Security. Number two, I'll say to anybody 40 years old or older, it's not going to apply to you either. I don't believe in changing horses in the middle of the stream. You've been paying into Social Security half of your working career, we'll keep the deal. But for younger Americans, I'd like to have, stand up there for fun. I'd like to have a conversation. I'd like to take that New Deal program of FDR and I'd like to offer you a better deal. Here's how it'll work. If you'd be willing to accept a later age of retirement, maybe a means test, if you cap on earnings, if you've done as well as we all know you're going to do. Okay. Here's the deal. I'm going to let you take a portion of your payroll taxes over the course of your life and put it into a personal savings account. Social Security gives you a 1% rate of return on what we put into in today. If you just make a 2% rate of return on a U.S. mutual fund of American companies, you'd get twice what you get from Social Security, and it'd be your money. That sound like a better deal?
Definitely don't want to be living with my mom until I'm 25, I'll tell you.
I like this guy. Give him a round of applause. Yeah, I like that. That's how you do it, okay? And the thing is, you go, well, how do you get Congress to do that? Well, you don't ask Congress, you ask the American people. I mean, all of the great presidents in our history have understood Congress does what the American people want them to do. I would go to the American people in settings just like this, larger or smaller, and I would just speak from my heart to Americans about the threat this faces to our economy in the future. Last thought, as the world becomes more dangerous by the hour. We're about a year away from spending more money on interest on the national debt than we spend on our national defense. If we are going to give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard, and Guardians the resources and support they and their families deserve, if we're going to have a military fitted to the widening challenges of the 21st century, we have to put our fiscal house in order and support our national defense, and I will. So help me God. Great question. Excellent question. Who's next? We've got a little more time before you get your day. Yes, right here and then up front.
Quick question about Ukraine. What's your position on the United States commitment? And I know you alluded to it before. Do you think Joe Biden's, let's call it a slow walk in delivering arms, prolong the war? And do you think this is a distraction, not a distraction, but do you think this is a coordinated effort between Iran, Hamas, and Russia to distract our commitment around the world? What would you do with Ukraine, I guess, is the question.
Well, I've been a very consistent voice on this. But let me begin with a criticism. Look, you know, people ask me all the time if Joe Biden has lost a step, right? I've known him a long time. Look, he's always been that wrong. That disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan could only have come from the brow of Joe Biden. Only. And it emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. I've been a very consistent voice in this primary that America is the leader of the free world. We're the arsenal of democracy. And I believe it is in our national interest to give the Ukrainian militaries what they need to make the fight and repel that Russian invasion. I've been a consistent voice. Now, let me concede. Some people in the room might say, well, I don't know. I understand. Joe Biden's done a terrible job explaining what our national interest is there. And frankly, I think the American people have lost confidence in Joe Biden as a commander-in-chief. But Joe Biden gives these gauzy speeches about democracy in Ukraine. I don't think Ukraine is any paragon of democracy. They got a long way to go. Let me tell you what our national interest is there, okay? And I'm going to say this as a former vice president. I'm going to say this as the father of a captain in the United States Marine Corps and the father-in-law of a lieutenant in the United States Navy. I believe it's in our interest to give the Ukrainian military the support they need to defeat and repel the Russian invasion, because I think it will be, if the Russians overrun Ukraine, I promise you, in the very near future, that Russian military will cross a border of a NATO country that we have to send ours to go and fight. Ronald Reagan in 1985 articulated what came to be known as the Reagan Doctrine. Essentially it was this: if you're willing to fight the communists in your country with your soldiers, we'll give you the means to fight them there so we don't have to fight them. I think the Reagan Doctrine still holds today. It's part of what brought down the Soviet Union. And I believe in this moment it is in our national interest to give the Ukrainian military the military support they need to earn a victory there. And I think your other comment is extremely insightful. Vladimir Putin was in Tehran this summer. Iran holds the leash on Hamas and Hezbollah. If you don't see a growing axis between Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, you're just not paying attention. And I really do believe this is a moment where America has to stand strong. And I'm going to continue to be a voice for that, because I believe it's in our national interest, in the interest of peace and security in the world. When the Ukrainian military, with our support and the support of other allies in the West, pushes Russia out, when Israel does what they need to do to hunt down and crush Hamas, the world's going to be a more peaceful place. But failing those two things in any measure, the rest of the 21st century could look a lot more like the first half of the 20th century. But thank you for your question. I appreciate it. Yes, sir, right here.
Thanks. I'm 41. Can I still get on that Social Security deal that you offered?
We're keeping you in the old deal.
Okay. Well, give me the option.
I
take
love
it.
that he was paying that much attention.
My question is related to that too. Because we talk a lot about the Social Security retirement benefit in entitlement reform. Is there anything we can be doing on the Social Security disability benefit that maybe have broader support? And then also Medicare. Is there anything we can do to actually get at the costs of care that could also save us on Medicare?
Well, let's go to lunch after this, because I've done a lot of thinking about this. And different than some others in this race, I've done a lot of governing on this, okay? All right? Look, your disability issue, I'm very sensitive to that. And it's a big part of Social Security people don't think about. That's why you got to put your fiscal house in order, so you can fund your priorities, right? You can do it. But you've got to change the trajectory that we're on today. The number I gave you of $150 trillion in national debt, that's from the Congressional Budget Office. That assumes reasonable growth in the economy and in revenues and projected spending that we know we'll have to make. $150 trillion in debt. Now, some people are willing to walk by on the other side of the road on that. But the best thing that happened to Karen and me since the last time most of us were together is we became grandparents to the 3 most beautiful granddaughters ever born in the history of the world. I mean, what are the odds of that? I mean, it's pretty fascinating. But I got little Avery, I got Etta, I got little Puka, that's what I call her. I'm not willing to say to them, you know what, by the time you get to your 20s, you're going to be crushed under the weight of this. And, if you wait to do it, I'll tell you what, these liberals, they know if you wait to that point to do it, all the choices are bad. And they all involve big government and taxes. So the short answer is yes, in terms of disability. And in terms of Medicare, I'm just a big believer in, I think the pathway forward in health care in America is consumer-directed health care, is empowering patients to choose their doctor, empowering patients to become consumers. We did that when I was governor of Indiana in Medicaid. We reformed Medicaid with health savings accounts. I want to bring the same kind of free market principles to Medicaid, Medicare reform, and we can do it. and to promote a healthier America, which is all of our goal. How about over here? Or no, how about right here at this table? Hello, please. There you go.
Sorry. I need to ask one question. How do you get elected? How does the truth come through, and how is it going to be honest?
How does the truth come through, did you say?
Because most conservatives are honest people. We think.
Yes, they are. Well, I have, how do I get elected?
Yeah, well, after it's vote, we
Yeah.
vote and everything.
Yeah.
Because that's where it all goes away. Somebody comes along and just takes a bunch and puts it in the back of a truck,
Yeah.
takes it away.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, my secret weapon is New Hampshire. That's how you get elected. Look, the people of New Hampshire, Karen and I have been so inspired at the way the people of New Hampshire take to heart your duty in shaping our nation's leadership. But the way you go about it, I mean, I can't believe the Democrats are skipping first in the nation primary state. They just announced they're doing their Iowa caucus on Super Tuesday. And I think I don't think it's about geography, Chuck. I think it's all about, you all ask tough questions every day. And Joe Biden doesn't even know what time it is. And I don't think they want him to be going through the vetting process that first in the nation primary state or the Iowa caucus puts you through. But I mean to tell you, I think the way that you all are doing your job shaping our nation's leadership, but I do think that the common sense principles of people here in New Hampshire, this live free or die state, are going to shape our party's leadership. I worry a great deal. If we produce a Republican nominee that is more of an echo than a choice, if we have a nominee that says they're not going to talk about Social Security reform or the national debt, if we have a nominee that says we're going to shrink from our commitment as leader of the free world, if we produce a nominee that says that we're going to back away from our long-standing commitment to the sanctity of life and traditional values, I think we'll get a result that we're all not going to be happy with. But if we give the American people a choice, a clear, positive, uplifting, visionary choice for this country that believes in the American people, we're gonna win in a landslide. How about one more question? You can applaud that if you like. I really, I believe it.
Yeah, my concern is about crime in the cities.
Yeah.
And these liberal bastions with these DAs that don't prosecute anybody. First thing I know is that it's a federal offense for a felon to have a gun. Yet we don't see the federal government under Joe Biden going after these people on a federal level. That's number one. Number two, our brave police can't stop anybody in half these states like Connecticut because qualified immunity has gone away without protection. Would you or could we do under a federal law that any time a state got a grant from the federal government that was required that the police officers had to have qualified immunity, and when they caught that gun with a felon, that the U.S. attorney would have a special division for gun crimes?
I like this guy. He's going on the road with me. How about a round of applause for all the law enforcement people who are here? We deserve that. Great comments. Great comments. Let me tell you, I love, you can use the power of the purse in Washington, D.C. to get some of these straits to straighten up. Qualified immunity is an assault on law enforcement in this country, and all you need to do is look at how departments around the country are struggling with recruitment, with people taking early retirement. I mean, look, this whole defund the police movement that the Democrats now kind of disavow, it's still out there, it's still real. But let me tell you one practical thing that I would do if I was President of the United States. I would direct the Civil Rights Division. Okay, before I mention the Justice Department, can I just say we would clean house on day one of the whole top floor of the Justice Department and fill it with men and women who are committed to the rule of law without fear or favor, all right? So, A. Once we did that, though, here's what I would do. I would direct the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department to go after any prosecutor who refuses to prosecute crimes against individuals in communities around America. We have to end this period of time where law enforcement officers are bringing people in that are besetting in sometimes our most vulnerable communities in our major cities. And they're just turning them loose or refusing to prosecute them. I think that's a denial of people's basic civil rights. The basic civil right of receiving equal treatment under the law and also being able to walk down the street of your neighborhood without fear. And so I would deputize to literally investigate those prosecutors to hold them accountable for not upholding the law. And we defend every American family, I promise you. Okay, I hate to report to all of you that, let me leave you with a thought. Look, I want to say thank you first and foremost for the great honor of being able to be with you today. And I want to thank the New Hampshire Republican Party for the warm welcome they've extended to me and my wife, Karen. Finally, I just want to tell you, and I hope you can pick it up in the tone of my voice, I'm very excited about the future. I'm very optimistic about the future because I have faith. I have faith in the American people. You know, one of the advantages of having been your vice president, having been a governor, and having served in the Congress is I've spent a lot of time with the people of this country. As your vice president and as a governor, I spent a lot of time with people in some of the worst times. When the tornadoes blew in Indiana, when the hurricanes came ashore in Texas, when the wildfires burned in California. And I want to say to you, while my opinion of the federal government has never gone up, my opinion of the American people has gone up every single day of my life of service. The American people are the most freedom-loving, faith-filled, generous, resilient, caring, innovative people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people, and I intend to go get it for us. And finally, as I close, let me say I have that other kind of faith. You know, out in Indiana, we don't get to walk around where all this history happened at the American founding. You all live it here. You're steeped in it. And I really do believe that from the very founding of this nation, we believed in an unprecedented idea in almost all of human history. There's only one other nation in history that's built on the principle that we believe that our rights came from our Creator, were not given to us by kings or charters or laws. We believe we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And I believe in that God has had His hand on this country from its very founding. And if we will just renew our faith in each other, and renew our faith in Him who has ever guided this great experiment in democracy, we'll lead Americans back to prosperity and security. We'll lead the world as a beacon and a hope of freedom. God is not done with America yet. And if we renew our faith in Him, I know the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. I'm Mike Pence. I'm from Indiana, and I'm running for President of the United States. Thank you all for your warm welcome.